rich are getting richer, and the poor are getting drunk. In a black and white picture, there's a lot of gray funk. Man, you're hitting their books and hitting their streets. Won't be hard to find. Tell new questions, asking me lies. Asking me lies.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Lies, More Lies, and Damned Media Lies. The title of our podcast is a bastardization of Mark Twain's Lies, Damned Lies, and Statistics. We'll look at the sins of omission and commission of today's print, television, and digital and social media in the line not only of Twain, but also A.J. Liebling, Alexander Colburn, and Beavis and Butthead. I'm Dennis Bro, journalist, novelist, media critic.
And I'm Jaleesa DuGros, an independent journalist.
And we're Bro
and DuGros
going
at the news.
Okay, well, we have a very special report today because Jaleesa is in Beirut and she'll be reporting from there. But first, we'll start with this sort of opening salvo. And the title of today's episode is Short-Term Gain for Long-Term Pain. When it turned out the Iran war was going south and it was obvious with oil and gas prices zooming, presaging the global inflation to follow, the Trump administration decided to admit this with a slogan that all their spokespeople repeated endlessly: short-term pain for long-term gain, a slogan which has come back to bite them. What the war actually is resulting in is short-term gain for Trump and other members of the Epstein elite amidst long-term pain for everybody else, not only in the U.S., but globally. Although the way that's read on the home front is not only globally, which we don't care that much about, but in the U.S., where to disrupt a pampered class's comfort even an ounce is disastrous. The oil president, who just declared war also on wind and sun sources of energy, attempting to bribe France's total into canceling its windmill projects off the U.S. East Coast, is not only profiting from the rise in oil prices, but may also be manipulating the market by capitalizing on false information in a form of insider trading that would make even Nancy Pelosi blush. With oil prices at $100 a barrel because of Iran's blocking of the Strait of Hormuz, the administration posted on social media that a U.S. ship had guided an oil tanker through the strait. On that information, prices immediately fell to $80 a barrel. The social media post was then deleted, which means that anyone with a put option on the price of oil, allowing them to sell based on knowledge that the posting was false, would have cleaned up. The war is going badly, not only financially, but also militarily, as Trump is now asking for an additional $200 billion because the U.S. is running out of ammunition. Of course, a boon for Trump's buddies in the arms industry, already larger than its next 9 global competitors put together. The order of the day for an already compliant media is suppression of information, both in the U.S. and in Israel, where it is illegal at a penalty of 5 years in prison to photograph any of the Tel Aviv carnage. But the footage seeps out, showing the Israeli capital, where most of the industry and population is concentrated, suffering major hits. The myth of the vaulted Iron Dome is shattered, but the Iron Dome now is the Israeli control of information. That is, the Iron Dome is now pointed in the direction of reporters, the press, and anyone with a camera, making sure not that no missiles get in, but that no information gets out of Israel. Nevertheless, a disaster of this scale cannot be entirely hidden. Or can it? Trump's head of the FCC threatened to any media outlet that published adverse information on the war, elsewhere known as The Truth, that they could lose their broadcasting license. And the self-proclaimed Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, complained about CNN's coverage and was publicly drooling over the fact that the Zionist funders of Israel's genocide military, the IDF, would soon be taking over the company so that no truth or criticism would be allowed. The New York Times, as if to prove that the administration had nothing seriously to fear from them, published 16 reader questions on the war in Iran and our reporting answered. Or 16 questions in search of a lie. The first question chosen by the Times editors is deliberately misleading. What explains Trump's turnabout on foreign wars and nation building? Since it frames the question in a way that suggests that Trump is the one making these decisions, leaving out the effect of Netanyahu and the Israeli lobby, the U.S. attempt to seize Iran's oil and control a choke point for world oil, and the fact that the war is and perhaps the last-ditch effort of a fading empire to maintain its power. One aspect of the reporter's answer is that Trump on the eve of his 80th birthday is focused on his place in history, which reduces a complex war to the errant wanderings of a single madman. The next question is equally misleading and leads as well to a misleading answer. It is how the U.S. was able to locate Khamenei and kill him, a question which validates U.S. power. The reporter responds in kind that U.S. censors allow it to track anybody, anywhere in the world, that the U.S. is all-powerful, leaving out the fact that Khamenei did not hide his whereabouts and deliberately sacrificed himself in order to unite his country. The unification is then disputed in the next question, which asks, what share of the country supports the government? The reporter estimates 20% and says many Iranians, not naming a number or a percentage, are fed up with their rulers. The characterization directly contradicts the footage of millions in the streets every night in Tehran, as the country as a whole, both hardliners and reformers, has come together to oppose U.S. bombing and regime change. And so the lies continue. Last point about the media concerns social media. A question that isn't being asked by the mainstream media is why, as opposed to the war on Iraq, waged with very similar and faulty premises, there's little outpouring on the part of the left, with most of the principled criticism instead coming from the right, with Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Judge Napolitano, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Candace Owens leading the way. The idea is to keep the left paralyzed in a U.S. Israeli campaign that is similar to that waged by the tobacco industry in the 70s and 80s, when it was apparent to all that cigarettes cause cancer, and the oil industry in the 90s and 2000s, when it was beyond reasonable doubt that that industry was a major contributor to global warming. The idea here in mainstream and more especially in social media, more frequented by the left, is to raise enough doubt to immobilize people, to keep them out of the streets. Thus, there is the supposed feminist critique and the concern for the treatment of Iranian women under the government, but not concern for these women being bombed, and also a refusal of the fact that women in Iranian society are everywhere in high-profile positions and outnumber men in Iranian higher education. There's a good deal of trolling of any kind of support for Iran's stand against American imperialism in the Middle East, backed up by its bases, which have become targets and are now being evacuated, such that Israeli propaganda, or Hasbara, since the American population opposes the war, is now hidden but omniscient, as the battle for the control of social media is now being waged alongside the Larry Ellison overt coup effected on mainstream media. There's also the left's tendency to disparage not only already existing socialist countries, but also countries that are leading the fight for sovereignty and against U.S. global imperialism and Israeli divine right expansion. The worst of these is exhibited by the former Greek Syriza economic minister, a voice of resistance in that crisis, Yanis Varoufakis, who has chosen the moment when Iran is under maximum attack to criticize its momentary turn toward neoliberal policies, which the regime has course corrected, and blaming that and not the 45 years of sanctions, coups, and bombing on the inability of the government to meet the needs of its peoples. In this current instantiation, Varoufakis is a Piers Morgan lookalike, accomplishing the same befuddling that is Morgan's stock in trade. Finally, aiding this immobility is the supposed progressive wing of the Democratic Party, who, like the voices on social media, are nominal outliers like California's Ro Khanna, who has been very good with the Republican Thomas Massie on both Epstein and the failed attempt to get Congress on the record as supporting or opposing the war. Ro Khanna, in his daring move, has proposed a tax on the oil companies profiting from the war and what is being billed as a give back to the American people. However, with Trump openly suggesting that the war and the opening of the Strait of Hormuz may require troops on the ground, the point of this tax is to rally support, entirely lacking at the moment, for sending American bodies off to be annihilated. In this war, as Yates says, the best, the supposed left, lack all conviction, while the worst, Trump, Netanyahu, Hegseth, and the rest of the Epstein elite, are filled with passionate intensity. And that's our opening salvo. Did you want to comment, or should we just go right to the interview?
No, so I think it's just, to touch on the feminism point of the war in Iran, how the West is completely preoccupied by the idea of saving Iranian women when they don't really know what Iranian women are saying or how they feel. You know what I'm saying? Yes. And then thinking that we can just bomb them into liberation. It's the same way that we want to bomb, we want to free Iranians from the quote regime, right? But there was not a word from Western media when it came to the 200 plus school children that were murdered, which it was documented and proven that it was the United States bomb that actually demolished and killed all of those children. So I think it's really interesting that Western feminists, these Western mouthpieces, and these pundits don't really comment on this side. So there exists this double standard that we just don't acknowledge. But yeah, to your point, very interesting. So yeah.
Yeah, really being used by the left to sort of, I think, befuddle people, and as part of this sort of campaign to keep people out of the streets. Okay, so Jalissa has been in Beirut covering this, what everyone's been, sort of watching, I guess. And so let me ask you to start out, what are you seeing in the north as people flee from the south?
Gosh, where do I start? So the displacement is massive. That's really where we should start. Is the displacement is massive. These families came with nothing. When we've been interviewing these families and they've been telling us, what they've experienced and what the situation was like, they are telling us we had minutes to leave, minutes to flee because we were afraid that they would start bombing indiscriminately at any time, and that they left on foot. Some of them left with nothing. Others, were only able to bring a bag. Nobody brought their entire homes or their belongings or anything like that. Most of them told us that when they were displaced, they were sleeping on cardboard boxes outside until mattresses were provided, until these tents and humanitarian aid, temporary tents were provided with tarp over, because it's extremely rainy right now. The weather has been rainy for the past week inside of Beirut. You see, I'm staying in Hamra, and, I was in Hamra when I was reporting from the South last year, and it was not this busy. It was not this crowded. And Hamra is pretty crowded anyways. So it's very, very crowded, very busy.
Is it a suburb of Beirut or a separate?
Yes. It's a little area inside of Beirut. Yeah, it's a little area. It's very lively, walkable area. I find it to be like a mini New York City inside of Beirut, just a little bit. It's lively. It's extremely crowded. The traffic is terrible. It's very overwhelming. Some of these businesses are out of business just because of the war, of the bombing. Some of these businesses nearby are damaged, and so they're not operable because, if they bomber struck a house, or struck an apartment residential building close enough, they can't operate. It messes with the electricity. They could have had damage to the restaurant or the facility. So, you have closed businesses. There's a lot of rubble everywhere. But more importantly, I think the Lebanese people are holding on to their dignity, and they're not willing to give that up. And I think that's very important. Understandably so. They've been extremely weary of international journalists, and I think just journalists in general. They will tell, I've been told, like, you're not going to make a mockery out of me. You're not going to you're not going to videotape me and I'm like, sure, I understand that. Absolutely. So it's just a really tense time. The security situation has increased significantly. You kind of need to go everywhere if you're not a local. I mean, even if you're Lebanese, but you live outside the country and you're visiting, I think it's advised you travel with somebody. The regulations on who can record and where are also pretty heightened. The Lebanese, you could just see tents everywhere. The more you get to that beachfront or oceanfront, Raushi area coming down into the central Beirut area, there are so many tents. But, we visited a lot of humanitarian organizations. We just finished with the Red Cross at the Shakib public high school in the Rigdun area, which is it's a public high school acting as a temporary shelter for these displaced families. So you have a lot of efforts made by NGOs, humanitarian organizations, and volunteer centers that are making food and dropping them off for these people, providing gifts for Eid for the kids. So you see a society, you see a population that is trying to salvage any sense of normalcy that they have left, of course, because this is not normal. This should not be happening. And you see the community definitely trying to rally for them.
Mm. It's interesting that you say, that sort of Western media are kind of distrusted because, well,
yeah,
they sort of know which side they're on.
Yeah, and
they want
sure. And it makes sense. You have a lot of legacy media kind of getting their one soundbite and then they leave. Just like I said with California.
Exactly.
Right? We're not talking about the Israeli occupation in the South. We're not talking about the illegal bombardment of civilian infrastructure or the targeting of civilians on a beach, or the killing of children while they're sleeping in their beds at night, or just the demolition and destruction of homes of innocent people sleeping. We're not talking about that. Legacy media is getting their one soundbite, and then they're leaving, just like they did California. So it never fails.
And as you said, in Minneapolis.
And Minneapolis, they're staying for maybe like 2 or 3 days. My thing is it doesn't even matter how long you stay, just as long as you stay, be honest about the situation. These, I keep seeing these headlines, and maybe I know we said I didn't prepare anything for a narratives watch, but I guess in I could give a small little bit here, just that. If you're going to discuss the situation inside of Lebanon, you should at least include who's perpetrating it and causing this and putting Lebanon under the circumstances that it exists under right now. This didn't happen in a vacuum, right? Like, why are these people displaced?
Yeah.
I'm sure. Did you also see that video of Steve Sweeney, the journalist in the South?
Oh, yes, with the bomb exploding while he was on camera. Luckily, he's still alive, but they tried to kill him while he was on camera.
Seriously. Yeah, absolutely. And legacy media, I saw a headline, legacy media said, watch as missile lands behind British journalist.
Yeah.
What kind of headline is that? What do you mean? Israel dropped the bomb. Israel bombed a journalist and he lived. So it's just
a favorite trick of the Western media is to put the to remove agency so that bombs were dropped, not Israelis dropped bombs.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is even like strategic.
It seems to be an objective force,
Yeah, absolutely.
Unknown.
Exactly. And I think these people think that maintaining objectivity is a journalistic but it's like, it is journalistic to hold the people that are wrong accountable. I think that there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make you biased to be like, this is wrong.
Exactly.
And when you look at the grand scheme of the situation, it doesn't even matter. I feel like you should be allowed to say Israel is bombing civilians in Lebanon.
Yes.
Why can't we say that? Why is that wrong?
Yeah.
So it's disappointing, but not surprised.
Yeah. Okay. To what extent is the Lebanese government, which has been extremely accommodating to the U.S. and Israel, responsible for this encroachment on its territory and its sovereignty?
Yeah. President Aoun was extremely...
let me ask you something first, which I think will lead into this. The Israelis claim they're only attacking Hezbollah, but it seems the bombing has been more widespread. Is this the case?
Yes, definitely. So they're striking those southern suburbs of Beirut and Dahia, as they have been, for years now. And of course, the majority of the Shia population lives in the south of Lebanon. And so, what Israel is doing is making every civilian inside associating every civilian inside of Lebanon as a member of Hezbollah. That's what they're doing, essentially, because we see the indiscriminate attacks in just apartment buildings, of tents outside of a beach, these displaced people. And, they said with that attack outside of the beach that they were targeting a man in his car, but he was talking with displaced people on the side of the road, right? And they just bombed the tents. And so, we're getting to a point where we're not seeing any outcry or, unjust statements from the Lebanese government. I think, we're just not seeing that, to put it in fair terms. I don't really have any elaboration on it other than that. So they are bombing civilian infrastructure. Okay. They're targeting cars. They're targeting motorcycles. It wasn't too long ago that they killed an entire family that was actually Lebanese American and was just visiting from Detroit or Michigan, and they bombed the entire family, the children. Half their bodies were missing. The pictures were horrendous. Half of their bodies were missing out of the backseat of the car. Were those children Hezbollah? These are the real, it just gives me, goosebumps even talking about it. It makes you angry. Are those children Hezbollah? So, as soon as I think you cross that line, yeah, you can absolutely say that they're indiscriminately bombing and they're not distinguishing between combatant and civilian. They absolutely do not care. And the response from the government has been nothing short of disappointing, disgusting, and just irresponsible, especially when your government is supposed to advocate for the people in their own country and at least maybe do something about the civilians that are being killed systematically on a daily basis, that are being forcibly displaced and told to evacuate on a daily basis, their homes being raided and then being bombed, and then Israeli soldiers, you have themselves making videos going through their homes. This is dehumanizing, completely dehumanizing, and the government has nothing to say. They're cushioning up to the Israeli military, the United States government. They are kind of inching towards that normalization. And just because you're not coming out forthright and saying we would like to normalize, your behaviors are kind of indicative of that, right? So, for President Mountain to not come out and not only disavow, right? Because I disavow, I strongly condemn are the new thoughts and prayers, okay? We need action behind those words. There is no action behind those words at all. If anything, what they're seeking to do is propose that the Lebanese military, the Lebanese army, turn on Hezbollah and actively work against them. But you have to understand that when I say this, let me try to put this carefully, that the citizens in Lebanon would not allow that to happen in general at all, right? And nevertheless, that would cause a civil war. I think there was a letter that came out from the Lebanese army saying we would not do this. This would be the start of a civil war if we went against Hezbollah in our own country. But that's what Israel wants. That would be convenient for the scenario, the circumstances here. So the Lebanese won't let that happen, though, right? Because you have people, Christians, Sunni, Shia, it doesn't matter, Orthodox all across the board that maybe don't agree with Hezbollah, but understand that the resistance group here in Lebanon is the only thing actively standing between Israeli occupation, invading and taking over Lebanon, pretty much. So
and
people understand that.
They've already been through one civil war in the 80s. They've experienced it,
Absolutely. And that was exactly how Hezbollah came to be, was because the Israelis were coming to invade, to attack the PLO, but now we're like invading and occupying conveniently. So, that's how Hezbollah was made. And so I just think we should not omit those facts when we're addressing the problem here. But, the Lebanese government, I don't think is doing much about the situation. The statements are lukewarm and how do I say, just nothing comes into fruition from their words. And you can see it. They're just not taking care of their civilians as they should. There should be more outcry. There should be more pressure on more pressure on Israel to stop killing civilians. But that's not what we're seeing from the government.
Yeah. Well, Israel claims to be fighting a terrorist menace, but to what extent is it not only attempting to acquire territory, as in Gaza, the West Bank, and Syria, but also to claim the water from the Litani River, with water being as valuable a commodity in the desert as oil?
Yeah, absolutely. So not only is it a land grab, it's a resource grab, because obviously Israel needs it for those northern settlements, but also obviously for the rest of the country. And if they seek to expand, they need that resource security right there. As far as them occupying the South and how evident it is, I mean, that you could give them an inch and they take a mile, right? They said, but beyond the blue line. Then they occupied the blue line. Then they said the Litani River. Then we moved back behind the Litani River. Now it's the Zahrani River Bridge. And it's just like we keep getting further and further. Now they're telling residents to evacuate. They're telling civilians to evacuate their homes from Tir or Sur, which is still south, but not as far south as they were, previously occupying, and then Saida, which is just a little above it. So we're quickly inching towards Beirut, and this is what we're not understanding, is that it happens slowly and then all at once. And that's what's going to happen. They get close enough and then pretty soon Beirut is occupied. And I know that seems like something that is just like a faraway idea, but I mean, how long ago did we think that it would never occur that we could have a 1 million Lebanese inside of Beirut right now because their homes are being systematically bombed. This is not a far off thought. Mm-hmm. So anyways, the Israeli military is acting under the guise of fighting terrorists infrastructure, terrorist cells, and things like that. But I mean, this is the same thing that the West does, right? If you can designate any group or faction that's in the way of your geopolitical interests, endeavors, or goals, then it gives you total justification to go ahead and strike these people indiscriminately or act however you'd like towards these designated terrorist groups, right? But the fact of the matter is, and we've seen with the West, is that as soon as you need those terrorist groups or those groups are now working for you or in your interest, we can remove that label and we'll begin working with you. And all of a sudden, you're just a freedom fighter. And
can you say
Syria?
Yes.
And Syria, HTS, so it's all too familiar. So, but as far as the doctrine, they're calling it the Dahi doctrine, which it is to just completely wipe out the city, make it uninhabitable, and then they have to basically live somewhere else. But we could also call it the Gaza doctrine, right? First Gaza, now it's Lebanon. Right. This is exactly what they did inside of Lebanon. They just exactly what they did inside of Gaza, just completely flattened Gaza out. They killed hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, okay? Hundreds of thousands. What are we doing? We're reducing their food, bombing the water wells. We're not going to give them vaccinations. And then we address or establish green zones, places that they can stay or places that were otherwise deemed safe or a humanitarian zone. And then we bomb those. We can bomb the hospitals. We can bomb the schools. This is evident just everywhere. It's written all over Iran, all over Lebanon. This is what we continue to see. And so it's first Gaza, now Lebanon. And so I think that it makes perfect sense that there's a large resistance against Lebanon, and that the Lebanese, large resistance against Israel's incursion into the south, and that the Lebanese have the opinion that they do about these. I think it makes perfect sense.
Yes. Yeah. The Zionists presiding over an expansionist state break the commandment, thou shalt not covet, coveting its neighbor's land. And in the Epstein era, not just its neighbor's wife, but its neighbor's underage daughter as well. So there's that,
Yeah.
It's horrible, but great reporting. Very brave to be there and to be telling this story.
Oh, thank you. No, they're definitely more brave than me. Living here, the bombs, hearing them drop, it's daunting. Seriously.
Yeah.
We should talk about that. My first night here when I arrived, I heard my first airstrike. There were 3 airstrikes. They were 2 in Beirut, central Beirut, and then 1 in Bashura, which is just a little neighborhood in Beirut. Nothing prepares you for that. Let me tell you, I've been kind of preparing to conflict and war report for the better half of 2 years now, just kind of learning the region, talking to people, making connections. And of course, we see the footage every day from Gaza and Lebanon. Nothing prepares you. When I got inside my Airbnb, listening to an airstrike, okay, as an American, right? We don't live under these circumstances. It's very normal for the Lebanese. My fixer, she was laughing with me. She's like, you'll get used to it. You'll go back to bed and you'll sleep through it. And if the Israeli military decides to send out a notification that they're going to strike your home, at least you have people who know, and they'll call you to let you know. It's a bizarre thing, but it's extremely loud. It sounds like thunder, but it abruptly ends. And then you can kind of hear sirens. And if you look out the window, you can see people driving in one direction. So it's daunting. It's daunting. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, terrorizing. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Psychological warfare.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that too. Okay. Well, I think we're going to move on to Times Watch, where we review and comment on stories in the New York Times and elsewhere in the mainstream media that illustrate the privileged status of those media mavens inside the Washington, London, Paris military imperial beltway and the New York financial bubble. First up is the Times on Cuba, a story on another failed Bay of Pigs invasion. These invasions are getting smaller and smaller after the failed Venezuela invasion, dubbed Bay of Piglets. And this is more like Bay of Guinea Pigs, which the Times, which cares not a jot that ordinary Cubans, because of Trump's energy and food embargo, are now starving, instead chooses to celebrate. The event involves a group of 10 lunatics who even the Gusanos in Miami largely failed to support. This comedy of errors in which one boat broke down, forcing the men stocked with almost 13,000 rounds of ammunition Forced to go into a smaller boat, the Times source characterized as a display of bravery, of courage, but one quickly upended by the Cuban government. Only 50 people from the most anti-Cuban section of the country attended a Miami rally afterwards, but the Times, pledging allegiance to the State Department anti-Cuban stance, noted that those who attended, quote, treated the men who had actually stolen a boat and were thus wanted by the Miami Sheriff's Department, quote, with reverence. Always precious and not to be missed is the rats deserting an already sunken ship as one supposed co-conspirator went into Judas Iscariot mode, claiming he was not the promoter, quote, or the boss of anything, nor did I finance anything. The story ends on a tearful requiem by the mother of one of the boys, creating maximum sympathy for her delusional terrorist son, with both seemingly unaffected by the misery of an entire country which refuses to buckle under to the U.S. Next up is Le Monde Watch, the French paper of record, which has now become little more than a socialist, red centrist Democrat rag, taking the side of what is called Gulf leaders who seek to increase their strategic autonomy and mourning the fact that the U.S. devastation could bring on civil war. The paper's concern being only with the Gulf monarchists themselves, who help maintain Europe's energy supply, and not concerned at all with those under the thumb of these leaders who might welcome a chance to overthrow them. The main event this week, though, was the first round of the municipal elections, with the mayors of all the cities hanging in the balance. The far right continues to gain electoral prominence, and Macron had come to power by convincing the left to faire un barrage, or to build a dam against a far-right victory. But this time around, as Macron's power and his phony non-party with the now silly name Renaissance, made up exclusively of his supporters, fades, the socialists have refused nationally to make an alliance with the party of the actual, not fake left, LFI, France Unbowed, to stop this advance. The socialists allowed the Macron austerity budget and a $26 billion cut on national health care by not voting to topple the government. They have little to campaign on, so they pulled a page from the British Labour Party playbook used to oust Jeremy Corbyn, accusing the LFI leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon of anti-Semitism, meaning he supports the Palestinian cause. We must remember that Macron himself comes from the right wing of the Socialist Party, which is now back in charge after briefly merging with the other left parties to win the legislative portion of the last presidential election. The Socialists then spent the next 4 years attempting and finally successfully breaking up this winning coalition. Le Monde's first week post-election coverage was all about the danger, not of the far-right RN, but of the actual left LFI, which, as their headline said, put the socialists to a rude test. The day after the elections, the paper had stories about every major party except LFI, whose story was rolled up into a lament for the socialists having to accommodate them. In a crucial election in Marseille, with the left in danger of losing, the socialists refused for this second round to forge a coalition with the LFI, and was up to the LFI finally to withdraw in order to save the election. The radical far-left program of the LFI, the most diverse party in what is at times not just a neo-colonial, but a colonial country, includes full reimbursement for health care, increase in social lodging, rent control, and the end of clientelisme, or lobbying or bribery. Kind of reminds you of centrist Democrats coming together in 2 prior elections to defeat Bernie Sanders, then losing one of those elections to Trump. In the end, the danger for these faux left parties is not the far right, which, like them, toes a corporate agenda, but the actual left, which promotes a people's agenda. And faux left is Le Monde's stock in trade. A final note on Paris and the Financial Times. That paper profiled the right-wing candidate for mayor of Paris, Rachida Dati, who describes her ambition in the paper as breaking the glass ceiling, not for women in employment, but rather a right-wing piercing of Paris, a loosening of what the paper describes as the left grip on the city, a grip that has included making it greener, more bicycle-friendly, and attempting in a small way to address the level of breathable air in what a few years ago was Europe's second most polluted major city. In an article the week before promoting school streets, that is, those entirely free of cars, the FT in a strange illustration of on the other handism, quoted the right-wing mayor of the 6th arrondissement, who thought children going to school could benefit from gas fumes because as he put it in the FT, car traffic is part of life. And that's this week's Times Watch and Media Watch.
That's interesting. How does the local paper in Paris, let me ask you, differ from the New York Times?
Well, it has to differ in some ways because, it was interesting because there was an American here. There is a party called the Communist Party. They're not outlawed. They're not, when this one American who I know said, where are the communist cells? We had to explain to him, they're not cells, they're an open party, just like everything else. So they have to write a story about the Communist Party, about the Greens, about the Socialists, and about the LFI, just like they have to write stories about the three centrist parties, the right-wing party, the Republicans, and the far right. One or two parties, there's just a multiple parties. That's one thing that differs because you do have to cover them. Though it was interesting this time that Le Monde chose not to write a story about LFI, only about the danger of the left of this form of this activist form of the left actually, encroaching on their, little side life,
Very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So also, I guess I should say this, I'm at Series Mania. I'll probably get creamed for this, but it's in Lille, right? So last night was the opening, and it was interesting because at the opening was Xavier Bertrand, who is the, kind of leader of like what's called here Hauts-de-France. That's this area, it's in the north. It's French Heights. That's what we would call it, right? So
Okay.
He's right wing. He's the Republicans, but also in the audience was the socialist mayor, and they get along famously. There's not much. They don't really differ that much. They're both in the audience. They're both enjoying a good cultural night out. And they don't have that much of it. They don't have that much of a grievance. It's just interesting to watch them kind of hand in hand.
How was Okay, I'm sorry. I thought there was an airstrike.
Oh my God.
How how was your convention, by the way, the media convention?
Oh, it's okay. It's just getting started, actually. So I don't have too much more to say about it yet because because we're just starting out. So yeah.
Okay, so next weekend you'll have
Yeah,
more to tell us.
have a lot, and there's 3 days of the streaming business, so we can see where that is. 3 days of Europe losing its digital sovereignty in trying to claim it isn't. So.
You're witnessing history real time.
Yeah, that's always fun. Okay, so did you want to add anything more? In any kind of narrative?
No, maybe like a general message to, I guess, our listeners and our viewers is that when it comes to the war in Lebanon against Israel, I would definitely look into maybe more local sources, more local Lebanese media.
Yep.
The Cradle is a good one. I write about it.
It's very good. Yes. Yeah.
The Cradle is very good for talking about Lebanon. Very, very good. I would also maybe say Al Akhbar. I think those are like pretty good local sources to look into. Maybe for like what the truth is happening on the ground, instead of looking at legacy media. Just kind of looking to make a spectacle, right? It's all for clicks and views, and I'm not for that. I don't really like it. But also, this is what makes our media industry profitable. It's very easy to do that. So maybe for getting the truth, maybe do that instead of listening to legacy media.
It's a good thing for us to do is to suggest really specific alternative media. I on the article that was published from our last one, they asked me to just suggest 3. So I did. One is, just in terms of the war, the gray zone, which is, I think, absolutely essential, Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate. Another one is Dialogue Works with Michael Hudson, which will give you the overall view, the geopolitical view, which is very, very interesting, And a third one that I like that has really great guests and a wonderful opening monologue is George Galloway's Mother of All Talk Shows. So those are
He's
three
great.
he's had. Yeah,
He's great. He's so funny. He's a good character. Yeah.
he is. And his vocabulary is unbelievable. It's really extraordinary, you know. I mean, if you want to hear Shakespeare in action, just listen to 2 minutes of George Galloway, you know.
And you know what? He doesn't stop and it's not scripted. He's just that good.
Yeah, that's right. He just talks off the top of his head.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay, well, let's see. All right, I think we'll conclude because I like to always kind of conclude with a review. And so this one is titled, "What is the crime of swindling an insurance company compared to the crime of owning one?" So here's a look at two working class centered series with mixed results. The better and clearer of the two is the BBC sitcom Can You Keep a Secret?, which begins with its major secret, kept by an elderly West British village couple, revealed to their law-abiding son. The secret is that the son's father, who he presumed was dead, has actually faked his death, and the couple, led by absolute Fabulous's Dawn French as Debbie Fendon, is now pocketing the insurance and state money from his demise. This working class logic outlined by Debbie for what the law would term fraud is impeccable. Her husband has Parkinson's, which the insurance company told him it would not cover. So she says, after a lifetime of paying their taxes, following the rules, and never getting arrested, she says, what have we got to show for it? A dingy house in the middle of nowhere with a dodgy boiler and a garden full of fox doo-doo. All this hints at the desperateness of the tail end of life for a class that is on its last legs, and fraud is as good a recourse as any to survive. Dawn French's exuberant elder in this series is the equivalent in this television season of Kathy Bates's lawyer avenging her daughter's death, facilitated by a corporate law firm in last season's Matlock. Both series deal in a highly dignified way with the aged, the detritus of capitalism, and with the problems and triumphs of that age group, attempting not to be forgotten, and in the parents' example in this series, full also of sexual energy. And what does Debbie do with it in her mind, her not ill-gotten gains? One thing she does is give it back to the community in the form of a donation to a cultural center for her town, which, like many others in Keir Starmer's austerity Britain, is starved for funds to support communal activities. Unfortunately, the series, as the episodes move along, loses the focus on aging and centers on a blackmail plot, which is much less interesting. And it's hoped in season 2 that the original focus will return. More complicated and in a way more damning is Hulu's and Australian streamer Stan series, with two Americans in the lead, Sunny Nights. Will Forte from The Last Man on Earth stars as one half of a brother and sister duo, Marvin and Vicky Martin, who in their attempt to launch a suntan sunscreen company, inadvertently get involved with a group of low-level Australian mobsters and con artists. The trick here, which the series only partially acknowledges, is that the American upper middle class entrepreneurs are more ruthless than the gangsters, who despite their crimes are solidly rooted in a working class Australian milieu. Martin is conned and then blackmailed, but it's Vicky who deals the murderous blow to the gangster who is threatening them. Vicky is at first the more ruthless of the two, wanting to blow up a rival company's stock, but eventually Marvin, with Forte initially doing a laid-back Jason Bateman from Ozark, then transforming after a talking to by a business coach and channeling energy he derives from the murder, knifing the rival company's stock in a murderous rage, which the series validates as him taking control. When they acquire more money from the business, Vicky wants to spend it on herself rather than put it back in the company, as at a higher level, American CEOs don't invest in innovation, but instead splurge on their own extravagant lifestyles. The better part of the series, though, and truly a wonder to behold, is the range of working-class lowlives who populate not only the washed-up amusement park they use as a loan shark and blackmail cover, but also other walks of life. There's Suze, who lures men into the honey trap, but who really wants to break free of this life and buy a motel she can share with her disabled father. Moni, whose violent rage owes to loyalty to her brother, and who explains the battered amusement park was where the two used to play as kids. The ex-rugby player turned enforcer Terry, who desperately needs money for an operation to save his life after a game injury. the rotund pest control female officer who has aspirations to be a journalist, detective, and many more. The series is a veritable instruction manual on how to create a range of varied characters by tying them to their working class backgrounds. Inadvertently, it also functions as a critique of the ruthlessness of the American entrepreneurial impulse, which in one instance sees the businesswoman Vicky steal the money that the rugby player Terry needs for the operation that may save his life. The savagery is disguised under well-worn corporate cliches like, help us help you. If we succeed, you succeed. An ethos even adopted by the gangsters, as one of them, trying to get out of their life of crime, says, I'm looking for an exit from my current employment situation. So it's everywhere, this ethos, the corporate ethos.
Art really imitates life here.
Yes.
The amount of examples that you've given that have reflected inside of television shows, like the manufacturing consent one, right, for police brutality, and turning it into like a whimsy thing. So interesting.
Yeah. I think it's good to. This is sort of more of the not political, but the effective reality that that we're all facing. Kind of in how it's being portrayed in media as well. So yeah. All right. Well. Okay. I think that's it. I think we've probably had enough, and the audience as well. So we'll say this is Bro.
And you grow.
Going
at
the news. And we'll be back next time with more live.